Well, I'm not a deacon, but how'd I do? Did I get through it okay? Did that work out? Yeah, thank God for the screens. At least you could read if I didn't do good. So this is really cool. This really is one of my favorite feasts of the year. But I was listening, like for the first time, to that first reading in the book of Acts, when the Holy Spirit fell on the disciples. They were all together in one place, and the Holy Spirit filled the room they were in. It was a great sound, like a mighty rushing wind. It wasn't a wind that filled the room, it was a sound that filled the room. A sound like a mighty rushing wind. And that's pretty cool because in Luke, and Luke wrote the book of Acts, in Luke, Jesus is the great prophet. And when Moses comes down from the mountain after he's been with God, and he brings the people and God together, it's with a great mighty rushing wind and lightning, fire-like stuff. Elijah too, his experience was noisy and loud and fire and wind, and when he went up into heaven, it was from this wind, this whirlwind that took him up. Moses and Elijah are the two great prophets in the Old Testament, and they said there's going to become a great prophet after us. Listen to him, and that great prophet's Jesus. And so this experience of wind and fire is a common Old Testament experience of the very presence of God among the great prophets. And now that Spirit falls on you and me, and we all become part of what the great prophet are doing. We have the Spirit of the great prophet. And so Jesus says, you'll do greater things than I ever did because you'll have that Spirit that I have, but there'll be many of you, and you'll be all over the whole world doing whatever it is that I'm doing. How cool is that? Now, what I noticed in the reading in Acts this time was something I never noticed before. There's two groups of people. I think a couple of weeks ago I said there's two kinds of people, those who love Jesus and those who don't, okay? Because the great commandment was to love Jesus, and he would come with his Father for all those who loved him, and they would make his dwelling place. The Father and the Son would make their dwelling place in us. Now we become a dwelling place of the Holy Spirit. We become the temple of the Holy Spirit. But this reading in Acts said that they were all filled with the Holy Spirit. All those who were together in the one place, the Holy Spirit came on all of them. They were all filled. But there was another group of people. There was a crowd there, and they were not all filled. They were all confused. And so today, I'm going to give you two options. Either be filled with the Holy Spirit or be confused. All right? And don't be confused. Be filled with the Holy Spirit. And you already are. You already are filled with the Holy Spirit. The reading I was wondering we might do is the reading for the vigil. It said that out of your inmost being would flow rivers of living water. That he was speaking of the Holy Spirit that would be in us and would be flowing out of us. Wow. That's pretty cool. So you are filled with the Holy Spirit. You might have closed yourself off to it long ago. But now on this feast day of Pentecost, we want to let that Holy Spirit again come alive in us and flow out of us like rivers of living water just flowing out of us. It's there by virtue of our baptism. No matter where you've been or what you've done, all we have to do is open up our hearts and let heaven again reign in us and let that Holy Spirit powerfully flow out of us. I'm going to tell you some stories about some fellow parishioners, and I'm looking around because we got 5 of them to tell us their experience of the Holy Spirit this year, and not one of them is here. I was going to point to them and say, he told me this, and she told me that. They'll be at another Mass. But the first one comes from a woman named Julie, who just came into the church recently. I mean, just a few weeks ago, it seems, she came into the church. And Julie had been out of the church for 40 years. Like the Hebrews wandering in the desert for 40 years. She was wandering in the world out of the church for 40 years. And all of a sudden, she said, the Holy Spirit started to stir in her and gave her the urge to start coming back to Mass. And so she came and visited me in the confessional of all places. You know what's cool about that? Jesus says to them, receive the Holy Spirit, as he breathes on them, and then he said, whoever sins you forgive. Right there in the forgiveness of sins is always the Holy Spirit. When we give absolution, we say, God the Father of mercies, by the life and death and resurrection of his Son, Jesus Christ, had poured out his Holy Spirit on us for the forgiveness of sins. And so 2 of the stories I want to tell you today are out of the confessional. Now, I'm not going to tell you what happened there. I'm going to tell you what they wrote down. So I'm not going to break the seal of the confessional, because these are the stories as they wrote them, not as I heard them in the confessional. But she said that when she went to confession, the Holy Spirit came on her very strong, and she came to church, and about the second week in church, just like the second time for Thomas when the Holy Spirit came on him too, and this time, she said she could just, by the Holy Spirit, sense all the angels and the saints who are present in the Mass. What a great prophetic word for us. The liturgy we do is a heavenly liturgy, and we do this liturgy with the angels and with all the saints. We say that every time we say the prayers of the Mass. With all the angels and saints, we give you glory. And so she felt that presence by the power of the Holy Spirit. She went to Alpha because I recommended it to her, and she said on Holy Spirit Day they were praying over her, and this great peace, a powerful, profound peace came upon her. And today in the gospel, Jesus says to them, peace be with you. Then he breathes on them and says, receive the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit is real and active in the church today and in the confessional and in the sacraments. And the Holy Spirit is causing people to experience the liturgy the way it's supposed to be experienced in communion with the angels and all the saints. We do this wonderful work of the liturgy together, and we say to one another every Mass, peace be with you. Yeah, open your hearts to where that peace comes alive. It's not just a word, it's a living, powerful experience among us. So the other person, Renee, who usually sits over here for Mass, Renee's just a beautiful person. Unlike Julie, he's been a practicing Catholic his whole life, but his wife passed away. His wife went to her heavenly home and left him here. And so he had come to Mass, but he would come with tears and sadness, and he'd take communion, but with tears and sadness. And he said this year, the Holy Spirit, even though he's been a practicing Catholic his whole life, it came on him in a profound way. You can be a Catholic your whole life and live a long life, and even today, the Holy Spirit can come on you in a profound way. He says now he still has tears, but they're tears of the Holy Spirit, tears of joy, tears of life. And he's looking forward to the days with his wife, but this is the reason he did all this. Every day he sits at home in front of the statue of Mary, who the Holy Spirit came upon and overshadowed. And he said, I just sit there in silence, and I can feel the Holy Spirit come over me and overshadow me. And now I'm filled with tears of joy. Yeah, it's the joy of this season of Pentecost. So the third was this beautiful family, the Barnetts, 5 of them. 5 of them. They came into the church, and just a couple weeks ago, it seems, I'm over here in first confession for these people coming into the church, and all 5 of them came into the confessional, and all 5 of them said, whoa, we were so filled with the Holy Spirit in the confessional. Most of us are afraid of the confessional. We don't want to go in the confessional, right? It's just the hardest parts to get in. The best parts coming out with a big smile on our face, full of grace and forgiveness. But when they went in, it was so powerful. The Holy Spirit overwhelmed them, they said. And when they came out to do their penance, the Blessed Sacrament was here. And so they were doing their penance in front of the Blessed Sacrament. And John Mira was over here playing a song that talked about grace washing over them and talked about new life among them and just how they could be filled with this new life. And they said they all stood there with their hands out, praising God. And they said we were just overwhelmed with the Holy Spirit, praising with tears and with joy. That's another way people receive the Holy Spirit. Just coming into the church is supposed to be that experience, like in the book of Acts. Tom Zach, one of our parishioners, his experience of the Holy Spirit was in Alpha. He was praying over his group at his Alpha table, and he said, I can't believe God would use me. How many people feel that way? Probably everyone's shaking their head. I can't believe God would use me. But as I was putting my hands on people and praying over them, they were experiencing tears and healings. And he said one of them was my dad. My dad was at that session, and he was ready to get up and leave because he had so much pain, he couldn't sit through it. But for some reason, he stayed. And when he laid hands on him, he said his pain completely went away. He was healed. And he said 2 weeks later, I was talking to him. We were talking with him, and he still had no pain. And he said today, his pain's very manageable. So the Holy Spirit comes through people who feel unworthy, right? Who feel too humble, who feel like it's just me. God couldn't do something with me. That's exactly what God does things with. Galileans, fishermen, tax collectors, and those kind of people he calls to follow him and become people who are filled with the Holy Spirit and go into the world. Last story, a man named Frank just retired. And so he wanted to do something, and so he started serving over at Outreach. And one time, after a few months, Frank said the Holy Spirit moved on him. It was Holy Week, and moved on him to make a gift. The Holy Spirit is a gift. And so when the Holy Spirit moves on us, he moves us to make gifts. The Holy Spirit is love. So when he moves on us to love one another. And so the Holy Spirit moved on him to make a gift. So he bought 100 loaves of bread. And he came over here to tell us about it and work it all out. And in just talking about it, he just talked about the tears that he had and the joy that he had and how the Holy Spirit had used him to be a gift in the world. The Holy Spirit, we call the gift of the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit brings peace, forgiveness. Every time we go into the confessional, we should come out filled with the Holy Spirit, renewed by grace, and just completely living new life. Every time we come to Mass, the Holy Spirit can make us one, and we can worship with all the angels and with all the saints. Listen for those words in the Mass today. Last example I want to use is you. The Holy Spirit did a great work in you this year too. You might not even be aware of it, but I want you to be. I want you to embrace this great Pentecostal faith of ours. I want you to just take time while Daniel plays the Holy Spirit coming on us, that Veni Sancte Spiritus. When we sing that prayer, just meditate on how the Holy Spirit worked in your life this year and did a great healing, a great work, something, urged you to do something, or be open to this being that day that God makes you aware of the angels and saints among us. God makes you that person that gets filled, not confused. Don't be confused today. We've been confused long enough. Be filled with the Holy Spirit. That's our faith. And what a wonderful faith we have.